and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. We're talking all things RBs today. I'm Ian Hartitz talking. Joining me, as always, the one, the only Dwain "The Rock" McFarland, whose voice is sounding a little better today. How are you, Dwain?
I'm doing good. I kind of like it. My voice sounds even deeper, like I'm in recovery mode, which is really good when you've got to match the guest that you're about to announce, who probably has like some of the best tones in the industry. I love to listen to his voice. So, I'm just trying to keep up with him.
A true king. The rookie scouting portfolio at www.mattwaldmanrsp.com has been pleasantly shocking readers since 2006. Footballguys senior staff writer, lover of the saxophone, slapper of the bass, Matt Waldman at Matt Waldman on Twitter. Matt, I mean, us fantasy guys like to pretend to know what we're talking about in football. Sometimes you actually can do both, and there is no freaking debating it. Again, truly fantastic stuff in the industry for 15 plus years. How's it going, man? Thanks for coming on the show.
Ian, Dwain, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Big fans of what you guys do, and it's an honor to be able to come on this show and talk about one of my favorite positions in football. So that should be a good time.
Yeah, when Ian and I were going through the list of guests for the different positions, obviously, we're going through receiver. Like it's Matt Harmon, we get to running back, and we started talking. We're both like, we got to get Matt on. Like we just have to get Matt on, like to talk about these guys. So, hey, we've got plenty here to get to. Lots.
It's the main event first. It's the main event, Dwain. We're not holding back. We're not waiting. The guy's gonna be the main event.
Yeah, it is the main event, and especially like this year. Like, I mean, it is every year, but like, man, there are so many names right now, Matt, and you've seen them. We've talked about some of them off air, like that are getting pushed up boards. It's crazy, and a lot of them are young. People are ready, like they want to be ahead, of the curve. We all want to do that. We're all trying to win our fantasy league, so we'll jump straight in. I don't think there's a better place to start than one Isiah Pacheco. Round 7 picks we don't typically see, fly this quickly up draft boards. I guess we could look back to Darwin Thompson. He was an undrafted free agent for the Chief a few years ago, and we saw something kind of similar to this. But he's had a lot of camp hype, and then in week 1, like the Chiefs back it up. We see Clyde Edwards-Helaire out there, and then the next thing we see is Isiah Pacheco. So just wondering, what your thoughts are on Pacheco. Like he's basically moved into like a round 12 range now in fantasy drafts, like in sharper drafts at the FFPC. But what are your thoughts on like what he can do? Do you think he has a chance to overtake CEH? What do you think his role can be? Obviously, people are excited about the Chiefs offense.
Yeah, I think everyone's always excited about the Chiefs offense. And I think that there's a lot of comparisons that people make to Brian Westbrook. And let's just get something straight here. Brian Westbrook was a special player. And when you look at Andy Reid's offenses before he came to Kansas City, you have to understand that Brian Westbrook was in a committee for most of his career with guys like Deuce Staley and Cordarrelle Patterson, late round guys or mid round guys that Andy Reid kind of cobbled together. And then whether it had to do with injuries or Westbrook eventually carving out that opportunity to have some dynamic seasons, that's great. But then you look at with Reid's teams historically, there was only one Brian Westbrook, and then he caught a guy at the end of his career in Jamal Charles, who was also just a Hall of Fame caliber runner in terms of what you watch on film. Maybe not stats, though. I think that'll back it up one day too. So when you look at Westbrook, the difference between Westbrook and Isiah Pacheco is that you have to understand that Westbrook has had fantastic vision. Gil Brandt, the reason I got in this industry was because I was listening to Gil Brandt talk about Brian Westbrook years ago. It was the first article I ever wrote on a player was actually Westbrook. And it was one of those situations where he said, listen, if Westbrook were 10 pounds heavier and an inch or two taller, he'd be a top 5 overall pick. But draft capital was a big deal for him because he had 2 ACL tears. He had his scholarship rescinded at FSU, and he played at Villanova. So you take all those things that are risk management assets, and his stock dropped. So when you look at a guy like Pacheco, he doesn't have the vision Westbrook had to begin his career. I think that he also at Rutgers dealt with an offensive line that ran a lot of gap plays where you have pulling guards, and those guards were often slow to get to their spots against better Big Ten and better competition, better teams. And as a result of that, oftentimes Pacheco had to take matters into his own hands to gain yardage, which can often be mistaken as that he doesn't have good vision. I think he has the potential to have good vision, but what you're seeing here is that he's going to have to adjust to NFL offenses and recognize situations where he has to stay the course because the blocks are a little slower to open, traffic's a little bit tighter, and he's not used to that. When he sees that at Rutgers, he's like, I've got to create on my own. Whereas when he's going to see that in Kansas City, there are opportunities where he's going to have to say, I'm going to have to stay patient with this gap. I have to read the leverage a little bit better. I have to be a little sharper with what I see. Will that develop this year? I would say you don't want to take round 12 odds on that. I would say you probably want to take maybe a few rounds later, 15 or 16, because he's going to be used more like a Travis Etienne or DeAndre Swift in terms of running the ball, which is he's a glorified space player, a receiver who takes draw plays, who takes toss plays, who delays, screens, any type of play where it's schemed for him to get into space as opposed to him to help set up his blockers to create it. Now, he might get better and outplay that round 12, but I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is the guy to own in that, for your teams. Whereas, Pacheco is more of a high upside play where if you're getting inside round 15, it may be a little bit more of a vanity pick to say, see, I was right. I picked somebody who's cool, who nobody knew about. Whereas, it might happen and prove true, but the process isn't really there to do that.
I think that's been the big thing that I enjoy poking fun at on Twitter. It's not that I'm out on Isiah Pacheco. It's just the extreme hype. Is he going to start going ahead of Clyde Edwards-Helaire here pretty soon? Like, I feel like we're starting to get to that point. Clearly, once we saw it in the preseason game, you guys can check out Dwayne's top utilization takeaways for every NFL team in preseason week 1 on PFF.com. To see Pacheco come in, rotate with the starters, and just work ahead of Ronald Jones and even Jerick McKinnon, that's fine. But yeah, round 12 is pretty steep for a guy that we're still expecting to be the clear-cut RB2 at worst. We have no idea if he's going to play on pass downs ahead of Jerick McKinnon. And hey, as amazing as Westbrook was, and my goodness, from 2004 to 2008, PPR per game ranks RB5, RB7, RB4, RB1, RB1. We had Shady, Jamal Charles, Kareem Hunt. Andy Reid's had some fantastic running backs. At least for 2022, Matt, it seems like Clyde Edwards-Helaire is still being set up as that guy. Do you think Clyde, a healthy version of Clyde, who's not weighing 140 pounds after gallbladder surgery or whatever the hell it was he set out there, is this maybe the year that Clyde gets it done? Because to be fair, I mean, I look at the last 2 years, Clyde's been the RB21, RB30 in PPR points per game. Hasn't been pretty, but why would you force feed the ball to Clyde Edwards-Helaire when you have Tyreek Hill on the outside? Could we maybe start seeing some of that receiving upside tapped into from Clyde? Because from what you're saying, it doesn't sound like Pacheco is going to be an immediate threat this year to really take over the pass down work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Pacheco can help you out as a receiver because he has terrific hands. His route game will have to continue to get better, but between the tackles is really where you're going to see the bulk of the looks for whoever's going to be the lead running back. And while Pacheco has more speed than Edwards-Helaire, and I think he's a better after contact runner, Edwards-Helaire was always an open field bully and thought he was quite overrated in the red zone. When people were talking about him being the next Brian Westbrook was far better even as a smaller back. I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is kind of, if you were to say that there's a starter kit, but you have to add like enhancements to the player, he was like an Emmitt Smith starter kit, which means that he's more on the level of like a higher end Mike Hart, which doesn't sound all that great, but he has very good decision making between the tackles. He really understands how to set up runs, but he's not going to run over or run through a lot of contact. He'll keep his feet and get a push, but that's why they were looking for Ronald Jones or maybe Derek Gore or Pacheco. And Pacheco gives you all the pretty much as a raw player, he gives you all what's on that depth chart in one player. It's just that he's not refined yet. And it could 2 months from now, he might really pick it up fast and outplay what I'm talking about here. But I think the odds are low. So when you look at Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he's probably not going to be a huge factor in the red zone. They're going to find somebody to do that with him, whether it's going to be Gore, Jones, or Pacheco. And then the receiving game, again, they're going to spread the ball around a lot, and they have a lot of weapons to do it. So I don't think there's a back in Kansas City who you're going to be taking and going, I'm taking an X round after round 5, and he's going to give me round 1 and round 2 value. It's just not there.
And I just refreshed with the last 3 days, thanks to Fantasy Mojo, who we got to meet out in Canton this past weekend. It was cool to meet Darren. But as of the last 3 days now, listen to this. So Clyde Edwards-Helaire is now going around 7 over in Footballguys Players Championship drafts. Matt, your own Footballguys Players Championship. And then looking at Pacheco, he's up to round 10 now. His ADP is actually in round 10 over the last 3 days, the last 38 drafts. So sounds like more of an endorsement to take, Edwards-Helaire in round 7 and just kind of chill out maybe on Pacheco. It is the range where all those backup, running backs go, because you have to start 2 flexes over in that format. So Isaiah Spiller goes there, Rashad White goes there, whoever I'm forgetting right now, Drake. We've got all these, rookie backs, so Pacheco's basically moved into the same range with them. So I don't know if that changes anything for you, Matt, if he's just kind of sitting in the same tier as those guys. And if you want to have access to a player like that, does it still make sense? But if not, it's fine. We can move on to the next guy, but I wanted to pause a second.
Yeah, that's where I'm drafting a quarterback, or maybe maybe another wide receiver, or I'm waiting later and going, well, Jamal Williams is never sexy for anybody, but when he's healthy, he gets a lot of production for you to be a flex play, and it may not be a high upside pick, but some of these are a little too high for my taste.
Yeah, makes sense. So we'll go to the opposite end of the NFL draft, and we have the first back that went off the board in Breece Hall. Another rookie that obviously fantasy drafters are excited about. And, typically the first one off the board, we all get excited about. Ian and I have talked about him a lot. We love the fact that, he was really good in all facets of the game in college. That's typically from a fantasy perspective. There's a lot of things we like, but the main thing is it someone that we think can be on the field all the time? And, Breece Hall definitely showed that even as a young player, in college, even though he wasn't a huge recruit. So he did that as a freshman and then all the way through, until, he left for the draft. But some drafters are concerned, when you look, it's a round 4 pick, almost on every format, even the home leagues like ESPN, Yahoo. Breece Hall is pretty consistent. It's in a lot of these, ADPs, we'll see differences, right, between some of these high stakes drafts versus what we see in the home leagues. And it's the same for Hall. Everybody's taking him in around 4. We got week 1 data point. It's only week 1 of the NFL preseason, but we've got Michael Carter on the team. He was really good last year, especially in the receiving game. And in week 1, with the first team offense, they split it 50-50. So just, what are your thoughts on Hall? Do you see this? And a lot of times with rookies, they start slower and then they finish the season strong. Do you see this being a situation where it's probably 50-50, all year? Or do you think there's a shot that Breece Hall really takes over? Maybe it becomes like a 60-40, 65-35. And then just, your thoughts on Hall in general.
Yeah, in general, I'll just say that Hall is a better dynasty pick than he is a redraft pick. And that's to be expected. But I would say that it's maybe a little more significant than people are rating Breece Hall right now. Yes, the Jets have put together a better unit in terms of personnel along their offensive line, but that you still have to get cohesion. And part of that cohesion is whether your quarterback is doing a good job of processing information pre-snap, early post-snap at the line of scrimmage. Joe Flacco will help for the first couple of games, but I'm not a big Zach Wilson fan. And I just look at this team in terms of making the good checks, making good calls, and putting yourself in situations where you can run the ball. And to me, this looks like a passing down offense on a regular basis. Maybe not to the level that the Detroit Lions had last year, but in terms of game scripts unfolding that are favorable for Swift. But I think that you're going to see more Michael Carter than you would expect. And part of that is that Breece Hall makes a lot of things look easy. But there are 2 areas of his game where maybe statistically it worked out well in college. But when you look at what you're projecting for the NFL, and there's some differences there, as a pass catcher, he has some issues with his hand positions that oftentimes may lead to still decent stats for him. But when you project to the next level and coverage is tighter, the ball's arriving quicker, you're having to think more about your coverage. If you don't have your hands in the right positions, you drop more passes. And that showed up in late game situations with Breece Hall multiple times where he dropped passes that he should have caught. And then as a pass protector, I would say he was a little bit more on the edge of where Jonathan Taylor used to be, who was, obviously a terrific prospect. And he can correct those things. But when you look at Taylor and Hall, it was kind of like, oh yeah, I'm I guess pass protection is something I have to do. How do I intelligently look like I'm doing that well when we all know if we're going to look at it on film, I'm just playing to the, I'm gaming the system, as opposed to actually doing the work at the level that I should. So Michael Carter is a good pass protector. He doesn't have the upside Hall has due to his lack of size, but he gets into position well. And he was arguably the best receiver in that draft class last year. And he's a good interior runner. If anything, we just talked about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. If Michael Carter were in Kansas City, I would be much higher on the Kansas City running back, and I would be drafting him inside of round 5 based on ability. So when you take a look at this scenario, I think it's more 50-50, mainly because of game scripts, Carter's skills, and where Hall has to develop a little bit more. And when you look at what you can get in round 4, especially say in home leagues, and you look at some of the wide receivers that you can get, even though maybe T. Higgins is second banana and maybe he goes a little higher in some leagues, you can still probably get him at the top of round 4. You look at guys like Brandon Cooks, who's always reliable, and Davis Mills is a little bit of an underrated guy. You're getting safe picks. I like safe picks in the first 5 rounds because people say, well, you win your league on upside picks at the end, but you don't lose your leagues by taking safe picks rather than getting guys that you go, oh, Breece Hall could be LaDainian Tomlinson. Yeah, maybe in a couple years, maybe he can have a season like that, but not right now.
It is interesting to me how the certain rookie running backs are getting lauded for their success in these advanced metrics, that Michael Carter is also finishing up the top, and we just kind of ignore his inclusion there. Javonte Williams broke, I think, 0.01 more tackles per touch than Michael Carter did last season. The Kenneth Gainwell targets per route run stats, Michael Carter is popping in those too. But I think your point, though, just about the 50-50 split, like, even if it's a little more than that, I just don't see really the path to Hall getting to 80% plus this year. And a lot of people seem to be assuming that. I did a study this offseason just looking at all the play callers and what percentage of their games did they give a running back? 60% snaps, 75%, 90%, just, one game. So that would happen. The only 3 offenses to not even feature a running back for 75% of the snaps in any game the entire season or their entire tenure with that team: Michael LaFleur with the Jets, Greg Roman with the Ravens, and Pep Hamilton with the Texans. So it's what history tells us. Now we can argue he's never had a running back like Breece Hall out there. But Matt, do you think we kind of overrate some of these gaudy missed tackle statistics with guys like Javonte Williams, like Tony Pollard and stuff? Because it's sexy. I love watching it, but style points don't matter in fantasy football. And just part of me wonders, man, what's really better? Like when Melvin Gordon, the play's supposed to go in the B gap and he hits the B gap and he gains 4 yards, or when Javonte Williams bounces outside and breaks 3 tackles on his way to getting 4 yards. I feel like part of the coach's mindset's like they want the plays to happen on the field as they're designing them to happen.
Yeah, because the problem is that part of good vision is game management, and it's a part of processing information. Oftentimes people look at running backs and they see the physical ability, they see the jump cuts, they love the speed, and they get enamored with all those highlight caliber plays. But there was a reason why Frank Gore frustrated fantasy owners for many years and played in the league for so long. It was because when a play was designed to get 4 yards, he could get 4 yards. And I remember, I showed a play at my site at mattwaldmanrsp.com where I talked about what would Frank Gore do. And I showed a play of like Anthony McFarland where, Anthony McFarland probably had some high missed tackle rate stats in college, and watching the Steelers run a play. And I thought, I wonder what Frank Gore would do in that situation. See if I can find something. And I kid you not, I pull up the first play of a game was against the Chargers. Same exact situation, gains 15 yards on the play where McFarland loses yardage because, again, it's about efficiency of footwork, understanding down and distance situations, and knowing when you should take a chance and when you shouldn't. When you take a look at Breece Hall, he's kind of a mix to me if I were to do player comparisons between a guy we talked about, Lesean McCoy, and Matt Forte. When he channels more of the Matt Forte in his game, he's a very disciplined player who's quite versatile and can be a high-end star. When he's a little bit more early Lesean McCoy, that's when you start to have those situations where you have a 2nd and 4. he tries to bust a 70-yard run on a play where he had an option to really just get the hard 3 and make it 3rd and 1, and now it's 3rd and 7 because of what he tried to do. And that's the situation that you kind of get worried about with him. And so with the Jets, with a quarterback who still has a lot to prove in Zach Wilson and is now missing training camp time because of his knee, and Joe Flacco, whenever he's in, they seem to play a little bit better, which is interesting in its own right. Are they going to be in situations when Zach Wilson comes back and it's going to take even more games for Wilson to get acclimated and he'd be a little rustier? And now the game scripts are flipped in the favor of Michael Carter. So that's part of that whole thing.
Well, kind of hitting, I mean, we already started talking about Javonte, so we might as well keep on.
Yeah, right.
I had a really smooth transition there. I was going Carter's former UNC teammate, but we've already started talking about Javonte. So Ian already mentioned it, the way he pops and the missed tackles forced, the yards after contact. You kind of touched on some of that there, and the fact that really what we're looking for, is, and what the coaches are looking for anyway, right, are the backs that can just do what they're being asked to do. But, looking at Javonte, he's going in the middle of the 2nd round right now, fantasy drafts. We have Melvin Gordon back on the team. Yes, the team did basically ice Melvin Gordon. They basically let Melvin Gordon go test the market and said, look, go ahead. But you're probably not going to get anything. And then when you don't, we'll re-sign you. And that's what happened. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because Melvin Gordon is back. And Melvin Gordon was a good running back last year as well. It wasn't just Javonte. I'm taking Javonte a lot. In the second, especially when he slips into the 3rd round, because I do, believe that the upside is elite with Russell Wilson there, as the quarterback, even if he just gets to 60%, right, of the work. I think Javonte can pay off his round 2 price tag. And then if he goes higher than that, right, you have potentially a top 3 back in the league. So I feel like, the range of outcomes is nice, but want to get your thoughts on it. And then while you're talking about it, just kind of re-hitting on this thing with vision, do we see players improve with vision? Because my other argument, I do have some people, Javonte can't read, he's breaking outside. Yeah, he breaks 5 tackles, and he gets 7 yards, but he should have just hit the hole and got 15. But to me, it's okay, well, if you're really good in college, you're Javonte Williams and you can take it to the corner store, right? And you can get around, your peers in college. It doesn't necessarily, I don't know that it always means you have bad vision, right? It also could just be you're adapting to life in the NFL, right? You were used to being able to do things you could. Now you can't. You're having to unlearn some of your bad habits. So just your thoughts around Javonte, but also just, do we see players' vision, improve? Because we give them credit in a lot of other areas of saying, oh, they're going to get better at pass protection. They're going to get better at this and that. But a lot of times when I hear people talk about vision, we act like it's like this thing that's just, we've drawn a line in the sand, you can't cross it. You don't have good vision. And maybe that's true. I don't know. But that's what it feels like. Anytime I hear someone talk about vision, it's like, oh, it's something a running back can't get better at. So I know you spend a lot of time thinking about hard fix versus easy fix and the RSP, one of the really cool features that I love about it. So why don't you let the folks know what you think about vision and obviously Javonte?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing with vision is a lot of people approach vision with this baseline idea that it's instinct. And the difference is that it's not as much instinct as people think. It's playing to the speed of instinct. And there's a subtle difference, but it's very important. And I often use music as the analogy for it, because if you're playing music, whether it's music or learning lines as an actor, learning techniques in terms of how, or just learning language, we don't come out of our mother's womb just speaking. We have to learn words.
I think Hartitz did.
Phrases.
I think Hartitz
maybe
did.
Hartitz did. Okay, he's the Bo Jackson of people with language. Okay, but really, when it comes down to it, you learn all these different structures and phrases, and you learn how to put things together. But you have to practice it, and you have to learn it in different scenarios, and you drill it. Even as a little kid, you may not thinking you're drilling language like a guy running through cones. But at the same time, you're talking to your parents. They're talking back to you. You're talking to your siblings, and they correct you sometimes, or they will, or the responses you get are corrections to what it is that you thought you asked for or thought you said. So you start to learn that way. With running back plays, the same thing is that there are situations where, like, say, bouncing plays outside when you should stick to the blocking scheme inside. You made a perfect point about that, Dwayne, is that, oftentimes it's because they're more athletic and they can do it and make the big play. And in the NFL, if they figure out, well, guys like Lesean McCoy used to do that. Jamal Charles used to do it, got better at it. Adrian Peterson used to do it, got better at being disciplined. Those are all guys who are examples of players who understood or who figured out that sometimes I'm not faster than everybody else, or sometimes It's better for me to take it inside because I'm going to keep our playbook open, and they figure that out. Then there's players like CJ Spiller and Lawrence Maroney and Darren McFadden who just never figured that out. And so it's kind of a 50-50 thing with some of these players. Some keys that I would say for people to look for with those players is that if they play in a zone scheme and they've had success playing in a zone scheme before, even if they occasionally bounced plays outside, if they show that their ability to get downhill and attack defenders, it doesn't mean they have to run them over. Like Jamal Charles, he could do a good job of being the first to deliver a hit and then spin off it and barely have any real contact. But because he initiated that contact first, he put the defender in a situation where they had to react to it, and then he could kind of dictate terms. Lesean McCoy was very good at that. But if you can get downhill and attack, whether it's Leonard Fournette running through you or Adrian Peterson, or whether it's those scat back type of guys who could still be feature backs, if you're showing the ability to do that in college, most likely you're going to be able to make that correction. But if you weren't someone who really ran hard through contact, like a Spiller or a McFadden who could run 15 yards downhill, try to drop his pads, but didn't have good pad level and literally bounce off a flat-footed safety who was just waiting for him, probably those are guys that more or less relied so much on speed that their interior running didn't improve. So those are some things that I would look for in terms of compare and contrast with types of players for that. It can get better. And when you look at Javonte Williams, really, I think his vision's fine. He may not have elite vision in terms of certain types of plays where maybe the penetration reaches the backfield, or he reads the alignments pre-snap unbelievably well and finds a solution like, say, Nick Chubb does, and creates, basically helps his blockers when his blockers fail with some of the things that Chubb does. Williams isn't quite there, but he can run gap. He can run zone schemes. He's versatile in the ways to approach both because they're kind of opposite in how you approach them. And like you said, he's a tackle breaker. He's a good athlete. To me, he's a faster version of Mark Ingram with maybe slightly less high-end decision-making traits that Ingram had. And Ingram, you look at and go, oh, well, he was never the great player that you thought he'd be out of Alabama, but he had multiple top 10 seasons in the league when he had a good offense around him and a strong quarterback. And that's what the Denver Broncos have right now. So to me, he's somewhere you may be drafting him in round 2 if he falls to round 3, and you're probably getting a guy at or slightly above his value, and I'm good with that.
Matt, the player comps you've just been throwing out since we started have been incredible. McFadden, Spiller, Mike. You mentioned Mike Hart earlier, man. I got Troy Hambrick and Corey Dillon left to complete the bingo card. So keep it going, my brothers. So I want to talk about another running back where we've and shout out. I love Hayden Winks over Underdog Fantasy. He correctly pointed out, but Etienne sure looked like the play was supposed to go in the B gap. The B gap was open. Etienne bounces outside and has to deal with like 4 unblocked defenders. With that said, the usage looked pretty damn good out there. Like, he truly wasn't every down back with the starters. Now, James Robinson wasn't in the picture. With this Achilles injury, though, we don't exactly know what version of James Robinson we're going to be getting in week 1 anyway. So what are your overall thoughts on Etienne, Matt? Because he does seem to have, the explosive ability and the pass catching chops that we do really want to target, particularly when he's falling into late 3rd, if even 4th round. Sometimes I think particularly in home leagues, you can get him in the 4th round. Do you have enough concerns about Etienne's just kind of pure rusher ability to fade him at this point? Or do you think he's okay enough and maybe we're just overreacting to one preseason run a little bit too much?
Yeah, let's remember that he hasn't played football in 12 months. And even with training camp, this is a good thing to remember about running back play. And a good lesson for it is that most coaches will tell you they don't really know what they have in the running back until they see live action with that player. And it goes back a very long time ago. You can look at players like Isiah Crowell, who may never have become a special football player, but he was a guy who was an undrafted free agent. Dion Lewis, and I'm trying to remember the kid out of Towson who was supposed to be these guys were supposed to be the starters for Cleveland, and Crowell was supposed to be basically an afterthought who was going to be cut. Not Tate. That was out of Auburn, but good. That's a good reference of a guy too. But he ended up showing up late in a preseason game because of a Dion Lewis injury. Dion Lewis broke his leg and wound up the starter that year, co-starter, and then ended up becoming a stalwart for a poor Browns team, but showed that he could be a decent runner before an Achilles injury basically wrecked his career when he had a chance to, have a chance with the Raiders a few years ago. And when you look at players, even like Kyle Shanahan will say, we don't really know what we have until we get them into the playing situations, because all that theory of how you read gaps, how you look at leverage, how you react and process all that information, that's one of the most important things about running back plays, that the closer you get to the line of scrimmage or into the middle of the field, actually, the better you have to be as a processor of information. That's something that NFL GMs are discovering. I know that Rick Spielman talked about that, former GM for the Vikings, on a podcast with Robert Mays at The Athletic, saying that this was something that they valued, and they realized more and more teams are valuing it, and they're figuring out that running backs need to process information as at high of a level as, you're looking at interior linemen and even quarterbacks in many situations. So when you look at a guy like Etienne, who hasn't played in a year, you look at one run, and if you damn him for one run, you're like, well, the guy's got to be a little rusty at processing information. It's not like he's been, working out at this for the past year. He's been rehabbing an injury. That said, to me, he's a little better than what Marlon Mack was early in Marlon Mack's career as a processor, which wasn't all that great, and slightly not as good as Reggie Bush, who also struggled, early in his career trying to bounce things outside. So I wouldn't expect Etienne to be a guy. I would say Etienne, if you're expecting him to take over for James Robinson and be like a higher end receiver, you're probably mistaken. So I wouldn't go for him above round 4, but at round 4, I think he can play to that value due to the game scripts of what the Jaguars are going to be facing. And the fact that they'll be able to supplement Etienne between the tackles with either Robinson, if he's healthy, or even Snoop Connor, who may not be exciting, but the rookie out of Ole Miss understands how to run between the tackles in a way where, Etienne may sometimes try too hard to make the big play. And they're going to have a lot of schemed plays to Etienne where all the resources are generated to try and get Etienne out into space. So while I think Etienne maybe one day, if he works hard enough at his decision making and can show improvement over the next couple of years, maybe he gets into that Reggie Bush, Clinton Portis territory as a player, but it's not going to happen this year. I think he's more of a high-end Marlon Mack, which tells you that there's going to be the need for another player in that offense to supplement him enough that expecting DeAndre Swift-like play, it's possible, but I think that the receivers in Jacksonville this year are better than what the dearth of receiving talent they had in Detroit had last year. And so as a result of that, game scripts might be similar, but you may see a little bit better of a receiving game. That means that Etienne won't have as high of a ceiling as Swift had.
So another guy, you mentioned the receiving game there, that's moving up draft boards, and it's because of that exact reason. It's Rhamondre Stevenson. So we've got a lot of folks that believe that Romandre Stevenson is going to take over that passing down role, maybe the James White role. We heard the stories all off season, right? That he's working on his passing game. It's coming from Romandre Stevenson, himself. But at the end of the day, like, we're still seeing, Ty Montgomery, like, come out there in the or not in the preseason, but come out there in practice reports, right? And he's handling a lot of the 2-minute offense. We're hearing about Montgomery being involved, in passing it, pass targets down the field, all those sort of things. And we know that the Patriots have really always had this running back by committee. A lot of times we'll talk about coaching tendencies and things like that. And Ian mentioned it earlier. Like, sometimes just because you got to go back far enough and be like, well, wow, they never really had a superstar running back. But with the Patriots, it hasn't really mattered. Like, they've always basically wanted to have 3 guys involved. They've got, and maybe it's to do because they know running backs get injured so much, right? And they just want to be able to fill in these niche little pockets, right, of what they want a running back to do. And they put 3 together to make 1. And then they don't have to worry about an injury killing their season. I don't know. That's just a hypothesis on my part. But at the end of the day, like, the question is, Rhamondre Stevenson now up to round 7. He now goes 2 rounds ahead of Damon Harris, which the last time I checked is still the starting running back, for, the Patriots. Going to have the same struggles, right? He's not going to be an every down back either, but he's going to get the high leverage stuff inside the 5, going to get those touchdowns. Stevenson, for him to pay off in round 7, like he has to have the passing down role, right? And if he does, he could. We've seen James White pay off an ADP like that in the past. My question is, do you see Stevenson as really being a back that could be like that, or that could even potentially break this committee mold that we've seen for so long, in New England?
I love Rhamondre Stevenson as a prospect and player. He has soft hands. He is very skilled at tracking the football. He has terrific feet. And before, when we're talking about big Rhamondre Stevenson, like, Lendale White-esque Rhamondre Stevenson, he could run over some D1 defensive tackles literally head on. And
bingo.
I think
I have Lendale White on my card. Man. You didn't.
See, there you go.
Bingo.
There you go. But when you have, but now he's a much more svelte version of that, probably quicker. And he was still quick enough to be able to get the corner on some SEC defensive linemen and linebackers at Oklahoma. I mean, he's a very skilled runner who I thought had, now this is the difference between pass pro, passing downs in the NFL and in college. I thought he was the best pass protector of his class in terms of who he could handle, where he could get position, and the fact that he could use his hands well to strike. Now, a big part of pass protection that happens in the NFL that they have to get better at, and that usually coaches are talking about without saying it specifically, is reading blitzes, being on the same page with your offensive line with calls, and knowing all the mental part of the game that supersedes the physical part. Because oftentimes people go, well, he doesn't look like he's punching there. It's like, because he's 2 steps late figuring out what he had to do, and he hasn't gotten to the point of doing just the physical skill yet. When it comes to this offense, I loved Rhamondre Stevenson as more the LeGarrette Blount I used to get after round 10 and get free money from him as a fantasy back, because people always wrote him off, and you could get him, you could get him round 10, round 12, round 15 and get yourself a top 15 back, even in a committee situation. Stevenson will play the Blount role, which will be, there'll be designed plays for him on screens and leaks out of the backfield, outside of the 2-minute situations. He'll probably get more looks in the red zone, and he'll probably get to split time with Damon Harris. But round 7, that's kind of the ceiling of where I think you want to take him right now, without injuries, without really understanding how this is all going to shake out. So yeah, it's a little high for me too, as much as I love him as a player, because ability wise, I think he could be the best running back on this team. And I think he could be a top 10 running back in the league. But you also are looking at outside. They're running more outside zone. You have the changes in terms of the scheme. You have a second-year quarterback. And while maybe Damon Harris has some work to do with running outside zone, and maybe the fact that Stevenson has basically come in great shape, and you obviously see a guy who was 250, 260 to begin his career at Oklahoma, and he was a 2,000-yard rusher as a JUCO player. So you can see the work ethic in his game is all the way there. I mean, to go from that to what he looks like right now, I mean, he's like, what, in 220 range right now, I think? And Bill Belichick, by the way, yesterday, it was either yesterday or today, praised Rhamondre Stevenson for his work in the passing game. So it isn't just Rhamondre at this point now. But that said, what you said about Ty Montgomery is probably true. So from this perspective, Stevenson, if he can drop after round 7 and you get him, go for it. But if he's going above Damon Harris right now, it's kind of that Isiah Pacheco I was right vanity pick for a sharp league.
It's interesting that you said the Blount role because, like, I think Damien Harris is in the Blount role, right? I feel like Rhamondre Stevenson's more in the Rex Burkhead role, right? It's the jack of all trades, right? He can play in the passing game. He could also step in, handle stuff inside the 5. So that opened my eyes. I thought that was interesting. If we really think that he could take over that kind of role from Harris, or at least carve out some of it, maybe that's something I wasn't calculating into his upside, because we saw it in the passing game stats last year, like his targets per route run, those things were all nice. So I thought that was interesting.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, and that's one of the guys I compared him to back in the day, was LeGarrette Blount. And everybody always thought about Blount when he was with the Eagles as his plotter. But he was such a quick-footed back with terrific vision. And Damon Harris to me is that guy that's like, Damon Harris is like, he's on that border where he's just above just a guy, as a starter, like if you think NFL starter, Mason-Dixon line, that's where he is. He's the Mason-Dixon line for NFL starter in ability and in almost every facet of the game. Like above that, you're above average.
Well, I know you said no here, Matt, but I'm feeling like I may want to take Romandre Stevenson in round 7 now.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say real quick, guys, like we remember the LeGarrette Blount year where he scored the 18 touchdowns, and last year Damon Harris scored 15 touchdowns. But if we're playing full PPR, which I'm on the record, I don't think it's the best scoring system to just translate real life football success into fantasy football success. Like Blount in 2016 was the RB 15 PPR points per game. Damon Harris was the RB 20 last year. Like the two highest scoring Patriots running backs on a per game basis were 2018 James White, the RB 9, and 2013 Shane Vereen as the RB 8. Like if Ty Montgomery's going to be stealing the pass down snaps, I just think it could be a situation where the answer is no.
Yes. And that's probably the best answer inside of round 10. Yeah. Because I have them pretty much even on my rankings right now at Footballguys, is that Harris is slightly above Stevenson. And then at that point, I start looking at that and I go, well, who are other players that I'm interested in? Because at this stage, I like Stevenson more ability wise. I like Harris in terms of what his role and proven nature has been.
All right, Matt, we got a co-main event now. We let off with Isiah Pacheco, obviously, but my guy, Cordero Patterson. Now, you look at the things he was able to do last year, first ever season, getting over 100 offensive touches in the regular season. Weeks 1 through 9, RB7 overall, RB6 per game in full PPR scoring. Sprains his ankle against the Cowboys, comes back shortly after. Disappoints down the stretch. Still, though, the RB20 overall, RB31 on a per game basis from weeks 12 to 18. Now, new offense, Matt Ryan anymore. It is a downgrade to Marcus Mariota, and we got to wonder if, fifth rounder Tyler Algier, Damien Williams could maybe mix things up a little bit. But Mike Davis had almost 200 carries and targets in his own right last year. There's still plenty of meat on the bone for Cordero Patterson. I have a question coming. I got another about 5 minutes of me just hyping up CPAT here. But all right, Matt. So CPAT, he is 31, but admittedly far less work on the tires. I mean, Jonathan Taylor has more regular season career touches than Patterson already at this point. Do you think last year was a complete fluke with Cordero, or can he continue to just be probably like a better fantasy running back than real life talent thanks to that pass catching ability?
No, and in the famous lines of Samuel L. Jackson, I'd do it again when it comes to Cordero Patterson. But basically the reason being is this. I don't know about you guys, and you might be able to tell me more, with your expertise of looking at things from a broad perspective. But Arthur Smith doesn't strike me as the guy who's like veers from his peanut butter and jelly sandwich every day at the lunch table. Okay. And the way that Arthur Smith likes to do things is last year, it looked like to me that the gap plays went to Cordero Patterson. Anything with a pulling guard, a toss play, anything where you said, we're going to marshal our resources to one hole and let's use your speed and tackle breaking ability to just get downhill and hit it. Whereas with Mike Davis, they said, let's run zone because we know you can set up blocks. We know that you can use your footwork to create, and then we'll split you guys both in the passing attack, but we're going to use Cordero more as a receiver in a lot of respects, or in the red zone where he can get open and do some selected things very well as a former receiver. And what we found out is that Atlanta wasn't very good at zone blocking, but they were better at gap blocking based on just what we saw with the results of these two running backs. Now, when we look at it this year, Mike Davis is gone. Damian Williams, the only reason he's gone is because Khalil Herbert outplayed him, and he was a high-end free agent for at least, what the Bears thought they were going to get out of him. And he's a good pass protector. He can run zone. He's a little better at gap too, because he's a fast player and he had to work at becoming a good zone player, but he's competent at it. Tyler Algier played zone, but I thought he'd be a better gap player based on what I watched with him, or Algier at BYU, because I thought his ability to track angles was substandard. And this is kind of a subtle thing with him, but as a pass protector and as a runner, he seemed to, when he saw an open defender pursuing him, he seemed to misgauge what he could or couldn't do against them on enough of a consistent basis that while I know there's some people I really respect in the draft game who love him, I just can't get with him at all. So now in a gap scheme, I think where he doesn't have to make these cutbacks and set up defenders as much, he can be pretty good. So I see Algier, however he's pronounced. I apologize.
Come on, Dwayne.
Players.
This is not the podcast to get your pronunciation straight.
Dwayne's supposed to lead this. Come on, Dwayne.
It's Algier, but hey, we how long did we mess up Okwebunam? Finally, someone just made us get it right.
See, there you go. So I think we look at this, and it's still going to be between. You're going to see a situation where these reserves are going to be more in a situational role. And I look at Cordero Patterson and what he did. He was coming out of school. I thought he was one of the 2 to 3 best open field runners I had ever seen at any position, period, in studying them for past 17 years. And as a gap player, I mean, Bill Belichick had it right. He promised that he was going to make Cordero Patterson a thing and figure it out to him when he signed him. It didn't work perfectly in New England because they probably felt like we couldn't get him to do anything more than run zone or run gap. But Atlanta, it seems to have worked out there. And because they're going to be playing in a lot of game scripts where they are behind and can't run as consistently as you would like, because they can't be as diverse of a run game as you would like to see with that offensive line. They're going to be chipping that, and they're going to be checking that ball down a lot to Cordero as well. So for me, I keep looking at everyone's, passing on him, and I'm thinking, that's free money for me too. I mean, like, I'll take him
both, brother.
Yeah.
We're with you. And it's round 8. Like even in these leagues where people pay a lot of money to play and they're drafting all the time, they're letting Patterson fall to round 8. Like, I mean, give me Patterson in round 8, over a lot of the guys that are going like in round 6.
And guess who you can take in round 7 instead of that whole mess in New England? You think of guys like Tyler Lockett, or you can take your chance on, if you want to take another running back, why not Kareem Hunt? Yes. If he gets traded,
we love Kareem Hunt.
If he gets traded, he's going to be the top back. If Chubb gets hurt, he's going to be a top 12 back. If nothing of those happens, he's going to be a top 15 to top 20 back. I mean, they have one of the best offensive lines in the league. Why would you take? Why you're trying to? That's again that whole thing about safety versus upside, where a lot of these backs we're talking about are upside guys, while someone it's like, yeah, you can get that special tool that might do these 5 things unbelievably well. But all you really need to do is hang drywall, and you just need these 2 tools, and just get a good quality thing like that. And Kareem Hunt is like that, whereas opposed to you're trying to buy something off late night TV.
Yeah, we're all in on Hunt with you. And we've talked about it. Like some of the like if for some reason, right, he was traded to Buffalo. Like we're not saying the Bills are going to do that, but like he would just take over the whole thing. Like Devin Singletary, and as much as we love James Cook on this show, like it wouldn't
goodbye.
Matter. Yeah. Kareem Hunt is so freaking good, and people don't give him enough credit. So, another player that people actually want to give all the credit in the world to, is Tony Pollard, and his underlying, data is great, right? It is a small sample size. He is out there a lot, right? Whenever the defense isn't expecting a running play, which is very different than what you're going to face if you're Ezekiel Elliott, trying to live life as a Cowboy. But at the end of the day, like these, the data and the metrics, like people run with it. And Pollard does have pop, right? He has upside, But right now, like there's a guy that sneaks into round 6 of drafts. You're gonna have to pay a round 7 option, a round 7 draft pick on average to get your hands around Pollard. So just what are your thoughts on Pollard? One, like upside, like if Zeke did go down, like are people really going to get what they expect from Pollard? But really the bigger question, number 2, is if Zeke doesn't go down, right? And Zeke, let's face it, has been pretty healthy. Last year's the first year he's really been, had any kind of injury that actually slowed him down. I mean, and he takes very good care of himself. The Cowboys seem very committed, right, to Zeke. So I think the question for Pollard has to be, can he carve out more in the passing game? What is his path to upside? And even then, like, is it going to be worth, especially like a round 6 pick? Or is this something where you think people are just getting carried away with the upside conversation, which apparently like is the case with all the backs we're talking about today, is that we're just too high on them. And again, there's also, right, supply and demand pushes these things up. Like as much as we may say, well, it may not be worth this round. I mean, some of it's dictated by, look, if you don't take backs, they're just all going to be gone and then you're screwed anyway. So what are your thoughts on Pollard?
Listen, I appreciate Pollard's upside as a player who could potentially become an every down back or a lead back in a committee, because when you do watch him run, he has great burst. That acceleration is important. He seems to have good footwork in terms of being able to process information when it comes to certain types of traffic. But at the same time, when you watch him, when you watch the Cowboys and you say, when a defense says we're going to stack the box 7 or 8, and we're going to run blitz, or we're going to do anything to try and stop the run in a situation where we know you're going to run the ball, Elliott's the guy. And to me, you mentioned him earlier in the show. If there's a guy who's kind of getting underappreciated on a level of, like, say, Corey Dillon did during his career with the Bengals, it's Ezekiel Elliott. So I look at this scenario, and Pollard was like Antonio Gibson. They were athletes playing a hybrid running back receiver type of role for Memphis. And until we see Pollard in situations where he has to process information as well as Ezekiel Elliott with the level of difficulty of scenarios that Elliott faces, to me, I'm looking at a guy behind him who's been on that roster for 3 years, who will be supplementing Tony Pollard on a regular basis as long as he can stay healthy. And that's Rico Dowdle out of South Carolina. And he may not become a fantasy thing on the level that Pollard did. He won't become like Elliott to Pollard, but he would supplement enough if Ezekiel Elliott got hurt that I look at Pollard's value and I just think it's a little too high. I just look at it, and people, whether it's film or stats, whether they look at somebody's speed or they look at a highlight or they look at a couple of stats that are valuable, but maybe a layer in the whole thing, just like looking at speed as a layer of all thing, they look at Pollard and they go, that's the magic pill. That could be it. And they turn analysis into magic and wind up getting a little bit too, a little bit too high on it. And again, Jerry Jones, whether we like him or not, whether we think he should be in the room in certain situations, whatever's going on with him, that Jerry Jones is going to basically throw his weight around with what he wants. And when he says Ezekiel Elliott's a very important part of what we do, and you have an injured James Washington, an injured Michael Gallup, a rookie in Tolbert, they're going to run this ball. They're going to try and limit how much they throw this ball because they have a decent enough promise with their defense that they're going to try and do that. And I think that means that Elliott could wind up being a top 5 back this year at in the situation where people are drafting him in rounds 2, maybe even falling further than that in certain situations. And people are so down on him. And I think Pollard, to me, you're asking him to do things like read the defense in the same way pre-snap and be a high-end slot receiver. And last I remember, guys who played that tweener role like Tavon Austin didn't quite work out all that well. To me, being more in the slot means the last guy that was like really good at that was, that was not a full-time back like Austin Eckler, was Danny Woodhead, and I just don't see Tony Pollard being Danny Woodhead. I see him being more of a high-end gadget. And as I always tell my readers, gadgets get lost in the TV, in the cushions of your couch. And you don't want that with fantasy.
It is insane that if Zeke never took another carry, he'd probably already be the number 3 Cowboys running back ever. Like, yeah, Emmett and Tony Dorsett, give them their due. Don Perkins, Calvin Hill, okay, like there's a couple older guys, but Zeke is already firmly in that conversation. You know, it goes, Matt, like it just annoys me that we can't talk about good running back play. And you haven't brought up like a salary or contract once, and God bless you for that, because man, it just bugs me with Zeke where anything he does, he has a good game and the reaction is, oh, about time, look at the contract. It's like, oh, yeah. Okay, you know, can we just accept the guy's getting paid? Good for him.
That's just human nature, you know, that's how it works. And that's why I don't even worry about contract with any of that stuff, because it's like, what does he do on the field? And he frequently turns lemons into lemonade in situations that people just don't appreciate about good running back play, to the level that they it's hard to do when you just look at an isolated trait or an isolated stat. You know, it all works together very well. And when you look at Elliott on that level, I mean, I talk to guys in the league occasionally, and when I bring up Zeke or they read something that I've written about Zeke, I'll hear from them, and that's usually appreciation, like thank you, because some of the things that I look at tend to show the same stuff that people overlook.
You and Jay Moyer are the voices in the wilderness.
We are
fighting the battle for Zeke, and I do appreciate it
for a long time today. So you know, I was trying to imitate my hair earlier in the show to be like Dwayne, but I'm just lucky to have hair at this point, you know.
Yeah, you have wisdom. You have wisdom beyond me, so you're good. So we got about 5 minutes, Matt. So we're gonna hit some rapid. We got 3 questions. We're gonna hit rapid fire here. So this next one, I'm just gonna make it super short. But we saw week 1 of the preseason, a lot of the rookies that everybody likes that are going around 10, 11, 12. Isaiah Spiller, Rachaad White, Tyrion Davis-Price. None of them played until they're right now probably the 3rd, maybe some of these guys might be the 4th back on their rosters. So any quick thoughts on which ones you think are most likely to still be able to send? It's only week 1 of the preseason. We can't overreact, but if you have one you like, if there's one that you think definitely you just wouldn't touch this year in fantasy, go.
I'm not touching Rachaad White because as good of a receiver as he is, he tries to run away from open creases where he has a one-on-one with somebody that he should attack. And he's in a small crease situation with duo, a lot of small creases in that type of offense. He's not good in small creases. He's a bouncer in terms of that down the line. Spiller, to me, I always like Joshua Kelly as a prospect, but it hasn't worked out for him. He's in the lead right now, but I think Spiller can gain on him. Very good footwork. I think he's pretty good. And then who was the 3rd guy we were talking?
Tyrion Davis-Price.
Tyrion Davis-Price. Man, there's some clinic tape.
You can talk Trey Sermon. It is allowed, Matt. So
I will be. But there's some clinic tape as a pass protector from him against UCLA that's really worthwhile. And he is a tough runner. But I do think that when a guy like Kyle Posey, who covers the 49ers, former football player, says, you know, if you look at Trey Sermon and Jordan Mason and didn't have the names on the backs of their jersey, they would look like the number 1 running backs at times in this camp. And I've been a big Sermon believer. I'm hoping he gets cut or traded somewhere else, because I think that what's Meryl Streep's role in Devils Wear Prada? I don't remember her name, but that's Kyle Shanahan as a coach with his personnel sometimes. And I think Trey Sermon, if he wound up in Pittsburgh, he could be he wouldn't be a co-running back 1, but he'd have a much better chance of being able to deliver. And if he wound up on another team that really needed a running back due to injury, he could be a good starter.
Awesome. So we'll go on to the next one. What running back do you think is currently flying under the radar that has a significant chance to make a big difference for fantasy players in 2022?
Other than Cordero.
Yeah. Other than Cordero, there's a number of guys, but I'll pick 2 who are kind of backup committee contributors. If an injury happens, it happens. Khalil Herbert, I liked him before. I said he was a high-end Dalvin Cook starter kit before the NFL draft last year, and he kept some fantasy teams afloat for 3 to 4 games against some tough defenses like the Bucs, and played well and outplayed Damon Williams. He was the guy who was supposed to be starting, and by the end of the game, it was Herbert all the way. He's going to get more touches this year, and I also think that if Montgomery gets hurt, he can overtake him and shut the door. And then the other guy, Eno Benjamin. I always joke that he was 90 90 proof Lesean McCoy in terms of like the things that he did well. But the things he didn't do well were pass protection. He had some issues with that, and he's gotten so much better at it that now he's kind of the lead back. And I wouldn't rule out Keontae Ingram as the guy that over time when they realize what they give them playing time and see what they truly have. Ingram, if there's injuries in mass to those two first guys, Connor and Benjamin, maybe Ingram could take off from there. But Benjamin is the guy that I would keep an eye on there.
90 proof Lesean McCoy sounds like a good thing. So, final question. As someone who spends far more time than most humans watching film, and when I say far more, like way more, like we talk, Matt, and like sometimes I'm like, I mean, you're coming off like an 8-hour bender of just straight watching film. So, who are the 2 to 3 players in the NFL right now? They do not have to just be running backs. They can be. That's up to you. But they just make your jaw drop when you watch them. You look at them and you're like, wow, even in the NFL, like these guys are just on another level. They're doing things that others can't.
Nick Chubb, the way he reads the field and the subtleness of his footwork, he can be both subtle and dynamic. I think he's incredible. Alvin Kamara is mystical in his ability to break tackles. There is the small micro movements of his game to be able to adjust is just incredible. And Jamar Chase, top receiver I ever graded. And when you watch his positioning at the catch point, in addition to his versatility as a route runner, the fact that he came in the league and did what he did right away. And I know he had good surrounding talent, but wow. Yeah, those 3 guys make my jaw drop.
It is weird. I think like because of how great Justin Jefferson also was as a rookie, I think like Chase is like literally top 2 rookie season ever. And because we just saw Jefferson, it's almost like I don't want to call him underrated, but
yeah. And I had, Jefferson was my top post-draft rookie the year that he came out, along with AJ Brown the year before that. And Chase was a guy, when Chase comes in, he has that hubris to say, hey, me and Justin Jefferson are pals, but Justin Jefferson stole all my stuff, and I believe it.
I believe it too, man. Matt, thank you again for coming on. Fantastic stuff as always. People can get your rookie scouting portfolio at www.mattwaldmanrsp.com. A true football guy. Go check out Matt's work over at Footballguys senior staff writer. Anything else you want to get off your chest, Matt?
Nah, man, it's a pleasure to get a chance to chop it up with you guys and look forward to doing it again someday.
Dwayne?
Hey, Matt's here. I don't need to say anything else. Like he brings all the good stuff. But yeah, just happy to have Matt on. Like obviously Matt and I, we've chopped up a few pods before. Always impressed, with his knowledge. Taught me a lot about the game. So glad to have you on, Matt.
Well, it's mutual. It's a reciprocal relationship for sure.
For Matt, for Dwayne, I'm Ian. Thanks so much for tuning in the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. Until next time, take care.